to Chapter 8, the Bill of Rights. As we go through this video, I will first read the information that is on the screen, then I will read the information from the textbook. Bill of Rights. Many people opposed the U.S. Constitution because they thought a strong federal government might take away people's rights. So most Americans wanted a Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. A Bill of Rights is a list of people's rights that the government agrees all people will have. Because the Constitution had already been written, the list of rights could only be added by making amendments to the Constitution. An amendment is a formal written change to a document, such as the Constitution. Welcome to Chapter 8, the Bill of Rights. Many people opposed the U.S. Constitution. They were against it because they thought a strong federal government might take away people's rights. Therefore, most Americans wanted a Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. A Bill of Rights is a list of people's rights that the government agrees all people will have. In some state conventions, the delegates voted to ratify the Constitution only after leaders of the group pushing for ratification of the Constitution, such as James Madison, promised to add the Bill of Rights. Because the Constitution had already been written, the list of rights could be added only by making amendments to the Constitution. An amendment is a formal written change to a document, such as the Constitution. The new United States Congress made a list of rights that would be amendments to the Constitution. A list of rights had already been included in most of the state constitutions. During the summer of 1789, after much debate, Congress passed 12 amendments and set the list of amendments to the states for ratification. The 10 that were adopted by the states are now called the Bill of Rights. The first two sections of this chapter will describe each of the 10 amendments. The last section of this chapter will discuss the history that led up to each of these amendments. The First Amendment: freedom of religion, assembly, petition, press, and speech. The First Amendment lists 5 important rights of people. These rights tell about liberty, which means freedom. The First Amendment says that Congress cannot make any laws that would limit any of the following 5 freedoms: freedom of religion, assembly, petition, press, and speech. To help you remember these 5 important freedoms, notice that the freedoms begin with the letters RAPS: religion, R; assembly, A; petition, P; press, P; and speech, S. Freedom of religion. The First Amendment says Congress cannot make any laws to set up a religion or to limit anyone's freedom to choose what religion they wish to follow. The government cannot force us to go to a church chosen by the government or prevent us from going to the church of our own choosing. The government cannot tax us and give the money to a certain church. The government cannot pass laws which help one religion, help all religions, or favor one religion over another. Thomas Jefferson said that this part of the First Amendment was intended to build a wall of separation between church and state. By this he meant that religions and the government, which he called state, should always be separate. Freedom of assembly. The First Amendment says that Congress cannot make any laws limiting our freedom to have a peaceful assembly. An assembly is when people meet together for a purpose. At assemblies in school, all the students gather in one room to see some kind of program or hear a speaker. This First Amendment right to assembly means that citizens have the right to get together and discuss problems and possible solutions without fear of getting in trouble. People cannot be put in jail for going to hear someone criticize the government at an assembly. Remember, the first stage of cooperation is to get together and discuss common problems. Every time people cooperate to change something, it begins with people assembling and discussing problems. If the government could make laws forbidding those meetings, people would find it very hard to change things. Freedom to petition. Petition means to write a letter of complaint to the government asking for change. Often a petition to the government is signed by many people showing that they all agree on the same complaint. Sometimes people stand out in public with clipboards and ask people passing by if they would sign their petition. The First Amendment says Congress cannot make any laws limiting our freedom to petition the government for a redress or of grievance. This means that Congress cannot make laws that limit our right to write a letter, make a speech, or sign a petition for the purpose of asking the government to solve a problem. Without this First Amendment right to petition, Congress could, for example, make it against the law to complain about taxes. If Congress could make such a law, then all people who signed a petition saying that taxes are too high could be put in jail just for complaining about the government. Throughout history, many people who complained about things done by a king or a government were called troublemakers and thrown in jail. This part of the First Amendment guarantees the right to ask the government to admit that there are problems and try to solve them without having to worry about being arrested. Freedom of the press. The First Amendment says Congress cannot make any laws limiting our freedom to print what we wish to say in the press. Today, the press also includes radio and television news as well as newspapers. The First Amendment says the government cannot put newspaper and television reporters in jail for criticizing the government, even if the government officials don't like it. Without the First Amendment right to freedom of the press, newspaper and television reporters might be put in jail for reporting about a government official who they believe was breaking the law. Freedom of the press means we can hear or read about all sides of an issue, not just what the government wants us to hear or read. Freedom of the press does not allow the press to print information that is not true and may harm someone. Printing information that is not true and may harm someone is called libel. The person who is libeled can sue the person who printed the false information. Freedom of speech. The First Amendment says Congress cannot make any laws limiting our freedom of speech. For example, Congress cannot make it against the law to criticize a member of Congress. Even unpopular ideas are protected under the First Amendment. Our form of government depends upon people being able to discuss problems, consider both sides of an issue, and listen to new ideas. Without freedom of speech, we would be unable to have debates and discussions to figure out the best way to solve problems. Freedom of speech allows us to criticize our government officials, talk about electing new ones, tell people about our religion, and discuss new and different ways of running our government. There are some common sense limits to freedom of speech. For example, the Supreme Court has ruled that the government can restrict speech when it presents a clear and present danger. Speech represented as a danger when it encourages immediate illegal action or violence, such as urging a group of listeners to set fire to nearby buildings or to attack a person in the area. In addition, a person can still be sued for slander if what is said is untrue and harms somebody else. Life in the United States today would be very different without the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment. People in many countries in the world today do not have these 5 freedoms that we take for granted. Without each of these 5 freedoms, our lives would be very different.